Okay, good morning. Hello, hello. I'm excited to be here with you today for the webinar on SQL Server on AWS. Today's webinar is unique because you're going to be getting, after a presentation by myself and then a demo of the lab, you're going to get a link to the lab where you'll be able to do the lab on your own. We're going to be emailing that link out to you within 24 hours after this webinar, and you'll have another 24 hours after that to complete the lab, and if you do that, you will be able to get credits sent to your Quick Labs account to allow you to run another lab at your leisure. Now, if you have any questions during today's webinar, you can submit them through the question pod, which is located on the right side of the presentation, and we will answer them as quickly as we can. As I go through my presentation and my demo, you might wonder if you missed the link to the labs. Again, you haven't missed it. We're going to email that link out to you right after the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and later today we will send you a follow-up email with the URL to the recording and a link to the deck. My name is Scott Zimmerman, and I'm a solutions architect with AWS, focused on Windows workloads. So this is our first time that we've delivered this webinar. It's our pilot launch, so please bear with us if we run into any technical glitches. But I'm going to go ahead and get started now. As you may know, AWS has two services where you can run Microsoft SQL Server. Amazon RDS, which stands for Relational Database Service, is a fully managed service that takes some administrative tasks off of your shoulders, like backups and patching. But you still need to optimize your schema design and your indexes. Now, on the other hand, Amazon EC2, which that stands for Elastic Compute Cloud, that lets you run SQL Server where you have full control of the instance. In either case, you can bring your own license, and you'll hear us sometimes call that BYOL for bring your own license. Or you can buy your licenses from AWS, called License Included. For example, when you launch an Amazon EC2 instance, you can choose one of our Amazon machine images, called AMIs, that has Windows Server and SQL Server. In that case, your hourly instance cost includes the Microsoft SQL Server software license and the Windows Server license. Let's compare running SQL Server on EC2 versus RDS. The most significant thing to notice here is that both environments are already familiar because you can use SSMS and SSIS in either case. The bottom four rows on this slide simply reflect the differences between having a managed service, like RDS, versus full control over the instance, like EC2. With the managed service, you get automated backups and really simple support for high availability, but that convenience comes with somewhat less control over the instance. Now let's dive into SQL Server on EC2 first, and later we'll talk about RDS. Having multiple availability zones, as AWS offers, is really a game changer. Most organizations would not attempt to set up a synchronous commit between data centers due to latency. But our inter-AZ latency, AZ is an abbreviation for availability zone, it's often about 1 to 2 milliseconds or less. So multi-AZ deployments with synchronous commit are actually quite practical. And this means that you can do automatic failover. Now please let the ramifications of this sink in for a second. How or when could you have ever done this before? When you deploy off-site synchronous replication with AWS, you don't have to build your own infrastructure, wiring, power, and rack and stack, etc. And synchronous replication between our AZs is, I think, very distinct from what other vendors are able to offer between their data centers. Now let's take a look at multi-region always-on availability groups with SQL Server Enterprise Edition. The left side of this slide is just like the previous slide where you have two AZs and you set those up with synchronous commit, and that means then that you can do automatic failover. But in case you're concerned about high availability and want to think about also having another region, you can set that up with asynchronous commit because the latency is a little bit higher there. In that case, you're going to need to do manual failover, and you're going to need to set up a VPN. between the two AWS regions. Now, an architecture across two availability zones is mostly concerned about high availability. But if you are also concerned about the risk of an entire region becoming unavailable, here are two options, at least two options that you have for disaster recovery. The first option reduces your recovery time objective and recovery point objective. But running a hot standby would obviously cost more. Now, a lower cost option is what I call just-in-time DR. This means that you stand by with your AWS CloudFormation template ready to automatically spin up your infrastructure in another AZ or region. And then you restore your SQL backups from S3, or Amazon S3 is our low-cost storage service. Now, of course, this will take a bit longer, perhaps several minutes or even a whole day. And you may risk losing a small amount of data depending on how you manage your SQL transaction logs. But AWS CloudFormation could spin up your infrastructure for the new SQL instances literally in minutes. Now here's some good news. If your secondary instance in either of those previous diagrams, if you took one of those instances and you determine that it's truly passive, and if you have Microsoft Software Assurance and you're bringing your own license, you can cut your SQL licenses in half, your SQL license costs, because license mobility is a benefit of Microsoft Software Assurance. And note that your passive instance should not even be used as a read replica. It has to be truly passive. There are many benefits to buying license included SQL Server from AWS, but this isn't one of them. So if you want to take advantage of passive licensing, you need to bring your own license and have software assurance. Okay, now let's focus on RDS. RDS is currently limited to 30 databases per instance. You can use either Windows or mixed authentication. In the lab, you're going to see that we're using SQL Server authentication just because we don't set up Active Directory during this short lab. Now, RDS also supports TDE for encryption at rest. And another interesting feature is native backup and restore to and from Amazon S3. So you can set up SQL Server in RDS to automatically back up to our S3 storage service. Pretty cool. Okay, now if you're interested in bringing your own license to RDS, you can do that as well. You just submit a license mobility form to Microsoft to verify your licenses. And that form is on our website. And then Microsoft will email you and AWS to verify. And you can deploy your application up to 10 days before submitting the form. When you launch your RDS instance, you will just choose BYOL instead of license included in the dropdown. Today in the demo, I'm going to show you how to do license included. Okay, this last slide before we start the demo is a preview of the demo and what you're going to do in the lab. Okay, notice the numbers on the left side. There are 4 key aspects to the lab. First, when you click Start Lab, the lab environment runs CloudFormation to automatically create an EC2 instance and an RDS instance. That's shown on the top row there. The EC2 instance will be used as your workstation to mimic an on-premise instance of SQL Server. The name QL created-RDS, that just means that QuickLabs creates the instance with CloudFormation. Okay, the second step is, at the beginning of the lab, you will launch your own RDS instance. You're going to go through the steps to launch an RDS instance, and you're going to call that one RDS test to distinguish it from the other one. But it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for an RDS instance to spin up, and which, if you think about it, everything that's really involved there, that's actually remarkable. So to avoid waiting on that instance, you'll be doing the rest of the lab with the QL created instance. In other words, after you launch RDS test, you're just going to ignore it. So the purpose of the lab is just to show you how to do it. Now, the third step is you're going to use PowerShell to download the AdventureWorks database from Microsoft and create it in the SQL Workstation, which has a license included instance of SQL Server Standard Edition running. So now it'll have AdventureWorks, and that mimics an on-premise database. So the fourth step is you're going to export AdventureWorks from your EC2 instance to the QL created RDS instance. And that demonstrates one way to migrate a database to the cloud. Okay, the table here is comparing the two databases that you'll be working with. To connect to the AdventureWorks database on the EC2 instance, you can use the local administrator account with Windows authentication. And like I said, RDS also supports Windows authentication, but we're not setting up Active Directory in the lab, so you're going to use SQL authentication. Finally, notice that the destination database name is called sample. That's just to keep the two of them straight. Of course, it could have been called AdventureWorks also. Now, during the demo, you don't need to do anything but watch. So I'm going to start the demo now, and you'll just be able to sit back and watch. I'll show you a few things that will help you later on with the lab. Now, we're going to be, after the demo is over, that will conclude the webinar, but we're going to email you the link to do the lab on your own, and you'll need your own Quick Labs account. But we didn't want to go ahead and jump right into that this first time, because some of you may not have your Quick Labs account set up yet. So at this point now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to start the demo. Okay, now this is the lab page that you're going to see once you log into your Quick Labs account and get ready to start it on your own. The first thing you're going to do is click Start Lab, and that will start the lab running. And like I said, it takes a few minutes to spin up those resources in the background, because what's happening right now is, since I just clicked Start Lab, is it's running AWS CloudFormation to start an EC2 instance and an RDS instance for us with SQL Server. The first thing you're going to do is click on Open Console on the left side here, and that's going to start a new web page. A new browser tab is opening up for me, you see here, where it's logged into the AWS Management Console. So let me make sure you follow this. We've got two tabs open now. The first tab is the Quick Labs console, and I've automatically logged into the AWS console by clicking this Open Console button over here. So now my second tab, showing in my Internet Explorer here, I've got AWS Management Console that's opened up in my second tab. Now again, you don't have to memorize everything I'm doing right now, because when you get the lab, you're going to see that the lab instructions are this guide here on the right side of the Quick Labs console. This is your lab guide. So you're just going to scroll through here, and you're going to do all these steps step by step. So you see here it says Step 2 is click Start Lab and then Open Console. So this is how you'll do it. Very easy to follow step by step. So we're going to go through this in my demo without reading those instructions, but you'll be able to take your time and read them later. Okay, so now that we're in here, we're going to click on the RDS service, and we're going to launch an RDS instance. By the way, meantime, if you have any questions, we have moderators standing by helping me out during the webinar today, some other solutions architects with AWS. So if you have any questions about running Microsoft workloads on AWS, or particularly about SQL Server or RDS, feel free to put those questions into the lab. Okay, first thing we're going to do now that we're in RDS is we're going to scroll down a little bit and click this Launch a DB Instance button. As you can see here, we have several types of database engines. We're going to choose SQL Server, and then we have several editions of SQL Server. We're going to choose the Standard Edition, which is SE. So what you want to do is click the Select button beside SQL Server Standard Edition. And then you can choose Production or Dev Test. For the purposes of this brief lab, we're doing it with Dev Test. And then we go next step in this wizard. Now it asks for the license model. So note what I'm doing here. I clicked that drop down, and there's a Bring Your Own License, or there's License Included. For this lab, we're doing License Included. Leave the database engine as 12. That's the version of SQL Server. That's what the lab is tested for. But in the DB instance class, we're going to choose a low-cost instance type for this. We're going to choose M1 small, which is adequate for this lab. So all the other options there, you leave those to the default, but you come down here to the database instance identifier. We have to identify the name of the instance. So we're going to call it RDS test. And a master username, I'm going to put in student, and I'm going to make a password. The password that you'll see in the lab guide is pass.123, and then I go next step. So that creates me as the administrator account for this instance of SQL Server in RDS. Okay, now on the publicly accessible here, you see that that's defaulting to yes. We're going to change that to no. And on security groups, pay attention here, please. You have to pick the one that's called RDS QLS. That's a RDS security group that was created by Quick Labs. And then we're going to scroll down, and for backup retention period, we're going to change it to 0 days because we don't need backups for this instance. As I said, we're going to ignore this instance after we launch it. So then finally, we just click Launch DB Instance. So that's how easy that was. We click View here, and it's going to show us a grid with all of our running instances. You see here we have the QL created RDS instance that is being launched automatically by CloudFormation. And we also have the RDS test instance that I just launched in my account myself. Okay, so that's the first part of doing that lab. Now we're going to go up here to the services menu, and we're going to switch over to VPC. We're going to click in the left-hand navigation over here, we're going to click Security Groups. And I just want to show you how to modify a security group. You have to see this little icon on the right side here that shows you, it resizes the window so the default information page down here is split with the grid up here. You see there's a security group called RDS-QLS. That's the RDS Quick Lab created one. We're going to select that guy. Then we're going to go down here to inbound rules, and I'm going to drag this back up again so we can see that. Sorry, I have a very small screen here. Okay, now this is the security group showing you the inbound rules, and you see that it has one for SQL Server on port 1433. Just to demonstrate how you can edit security groups, I'm going to click Edit here. And then I'm going to change this source, which is showing you a security group ID. In the lab, you're going to be told to delete that out and change it to 0.0.0.0/0. That's a CIDR address, or classless internet domain routing, that means the whole internet. So this shows you how you could provide access to SQL Server in RDS from other IP addresses. Of course, it's not advisable to provide access to the whole internet, but you noticed, you recall earlier I did say that it was not publicly accessible. But this is going to make sure that I can get to the instance from the EC2 instance that we're going to demonstrate in the next step. So now that I've edited that, I just click Save. Okay, so that's how you edit a security group in the virtual private cloud so that you can access your RDS instance from anywhere. Okay, the next step we're going to do is we're going to go back to the services menu, and we're going to click on EC2 now. Okay, now it's going to show us the EC2 instance that we've already got running. We have to click Instances over here on the left side in the nav bar in the EC2 dashboard, and there's the Quick Labs instance that is being launched for us, and it says it's already running. Okay, at the bottom here we have a public DNS address. I'm going to copy that and very carefully highlight it all and then press Control-C. Since I'm running Windows, I'm going to copy that to my clipboard. Okay, now I'm going to go to my Start menu and I'm going to type MSTSC. I want to make sure I did that right. Hang on a second. Did I leave something out? Okay, that's to open up remote desktop connection. And I'm going to now paste the public DNS address into the computer name. I'm going to click Show Options to open this up so we can see that. In the username box, I'm going to type Administrator, and then I'm going to click Connect. Now this may not work the very first time. Okay, it did because I've been talking for a few minutes. So the instance has already been launched in the background, and it's ready for me to log into it. But what is the administrator password? Now ordinarily you have to get a security key pair and decrypt that in order to be able to log into the EC2 instance. But when you do a Quick Lab, we simplify it for you a little bit. So I'm going to go back over here to my Quick Labs console. I clicked in the browser to my Quick Labs console, and you see over here where it says RDP details, there's a little icon to the right, and that copies it to the clipboard. Internet Explorer pops up this little dialog that says, do you want to allow clipboard access? And you have to say yes, I want to allow access. Okay, so now this password is copied to my clipboard, so I can go back to my RDP window here, my remote desktop connection, and press Control-V to paste that password in. And all these steps are explained in the lab guide, so you'll see this later how to do that. So now I can click OK, and then I get this warning that is normal because the EC2 instance doesn't have a certificate for my workstation. It doesn't know which computer I'm on. So I say yes, that's a normal warning. Don't worry about that. Okay, now it's opening up a remote desktop window to the Windows Server instance running in AWS. And all that business about logging in with the secure password, that's to ensure that you're the only one who can log into your instance after you launch it. Now, this is a part where we always have to just wait a moment for the remote desktop connection to display the Windows Server desktop. Now, as I mentioned, when we launched this instance, this EC2 instance, it is a license included with SQL Server. So this is not just Windows Server, it's also SQL Server. So what we're going to be doing on this instance, in a moment this desktop is going to appear and we'll continue. We're going to run SQL Server Management Studio, and we're going to bring in the AdventureWorks sample database. We're going to download that from Microsoft and install it into this SQL instance. And then at that point, we're going to pretend that this is like a on-premise SQL workstation that we have where we have an on-premise database. That's the AdventureWorks database. And then from there, we're going to create a database in RDS and export the AdventureWorks database into it. So I'm just giving a moment here for the Windows desktop to appear. Sometimes there's a delay, first of all, launching Windows Server. It takes about 4 to 5 minutes for AWS to launch that instance for you and set the password up and create the Windows desktop and let RDP log into it. A lot of things going on in the background there. Okay, now that we've got it, we can click the Start menu button down here, and we're going to type SSMS to search for SQL Server Management Studio. Wait for the search results to catch up, and then click SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so that's spinning up now in the background. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to launch PowerShell. So I'm going to click on the Start menu here again. I'm going to click this little down arrow to go to this app screen in Windows Server. And then notice that there is a program called Windows PowerShell ISE. Now you don't need the one called x86 and you don't need the administrator version, you just want Windows PowerShell ISE. So we're going to launch that up. Okay, now while that's launching, I'm going to minimize remote desktop connection and go back over to the lab guide. See this lab guide here? We've been going through these steps and let's see, what step am I on now? We're down here at step 33 we've gotten to. And you see there's some PowerShell code there. I'm going to click in that window, and then I'm going to click, again, this little icon, the clipboard icon, to copy that to my clipboard. And it says if it copies it successfully, it'll highlight it and tell you that it copied it. Okay, so you have to go back to the lab guide to get that. If you have 2 monitors, it's really helpful to run one monitor with your browser and another monitor with remote desktop connection. And by the way, you can run the lab from Mac or Linux. You'll just need to get a remote desktop connection or an RDP client program. And there's links to that in the lab. You can get one on the Mac, no problem. So you can connect to Windows EC2 instances with a Mac or Linux. Okay, now I'm back into the remote desktop connection window, and I've got my PowerShell script pane open there. If you don't see that, you just go to the View menu and you see where it says Show Script Pane. You can press Control-R to open that up. But I'm going to press Control-V right now to paste in that PowerShell code that I copied from the lab guide. So now I can run that. And what that code is doing is it's creating a folder called dbdump, and then it goes out to Microsoft and downloads the sample AdventureWorks database. Okay, that looks good. It downloaded it. So now I open up Windows File Explorer here, go to the C drive, Users, Public, dbdump, and then there's the zip file that we just downloaded. I'm going to right-click on that and say Extract All, and then Extract. Okay, so that expands out that database files. That's good. So now I can close Explorer. I don't need that. Next step we're going to do is we're going to go back to the lab, and we've gone through those instructions. Now we're going to run this SQL command to create the database. So again, I click in the text box, and then I click the little clipboard icon. It copied it. Now I go back to remote desktop connection. Okay, I got to delete this text in here in the script pane. I want to have a blank script pane. Then I press Control-V to paste in the new command. Let's look again at this. This is going to run SQL command to create database AdventureWorks. Okay, here we go. We're going to run that. Wait until the cursor comes back so you know that that step is done. Okay, so now we have the AdventureWorks database in there. Let me just check my notes. What did I want to do next? Okay, we're going to go back to RDS menu in the browser. Over here, and let's go to Services menu, RDS, and then we got to scroll to look at instances. Okay, there's our two instances, and you see it says the QL created RDS instance is currently backing up. So we're going to click on that to select it, and notice the endpoint there. It says endpoint, QL created RDS. It's at Amazon, AWS.com. We're going to highlight that and press Control-C to copy that to the clipboard. Now we're going to go back to remote desktop connection. I'm done with PowerShell, so I can just close that out. And I'm going to open up Notepad. So I click on the Start menu and type Notepad. You'll see why we're doing this in a second. I'm going to paste that link in there. Okay, so that's the endpoint to the RDS instance that we're creating. But in order to use it with SQL Server Management Studio, we have to delete the 1433 on the end, the colon 1433. We want to get only the URL part itself without the port. So then I'm going to highlight the whole thing and copy it to the clipboard. Okay, I can minimize Notepad and come in here where it says server name. This is connecting to the current server, the local instance, and we're using Windows authentication. We're going to go ahead and do that, say connect. Okay, you see that we have under databases, I've expanded that out, and on the local instance we have the AdventureWorks database. That's what we expected to see there. But now we're going to click connect, and we're going to connect to the RDS instance. So we have to connect to the database engine, and here the server name, we're going to change it. Instead of connecting to the local instance, I'm going to press Control-V to paste the URL, the endpoint of the RDS instance. And as you recall, as I said a couple times, we can't use Windows authentication on that one because we didn't set up Active Directory here. So we're going to change this to SQL Server authentication and use the identifier that we set it up for, student. Okay, so now I'm logging into that instance, and there it is. Okay, so and these databases under this QL created RDS instance do not have an AdventureWorks copy yet, so we're going to right-click on databases and say New Database. And we're going to make a new SQL Server database called Sample. So I'll just type Sample here and then click OK. You don't have to change the size of the file groups. Okay, that's good. Now, let's see, what's the next step? Okay, we want to go back over to the AdventureWorks database up here, and we're going to right-click on that, and we're going to say Tasks, and then Export Data. Okay, see how I'm doing that? I'm choosing AdventureWorks under the local instance, and then Tasks, Export Data. Okay, on the welcome page, we just say Next. We're going to go through this standard wizard for SQL Server. Takes a moment here for the data source to populate that combo box. That's normal behavior. What we want to do is choose, down at the bottom list here, we're going to choose SQL Server Native Client 11.0. Now, the server name is, again, the local host. If you don't see that showing there with the win-netbios name, you can just change that to localhost. And the database has defaulted to AdventureWorks. That's perfect. That's what we want. So we click Next here. Okay, now it's on the destination page, and again, we're going to scroll down and choose SQL Server Native Client 11.0. But here, for the server name, we have to paste in that URL endpoint again. I still have that in my clipboard buffer, so I just press Control-V. Also, remember, we can't use Windows Auth to log into that instance. We're going to need to use SQL Server Auth here. So I'm going to put this in again, student and pass.123. Now, the database, I don't want to just go to default. I want to pick sample here. So I'm going to try to populate the sample database. Click Next. We're going to copy data from one or more. That's fine. Leave it as is. Then choose this little checkbox at the very top left. That picks all the tables. Go Next. And we're going to want to run this immediately, so we go Next. And then we click Finish. And it is now exporting the database from our pseudo local instance, which is actually the EC2 instance that is mimicking an on-premise instance. It's exporting all that data into RDS. So now that that's done, we can click Close here. Okay, the next step is we want to see if it worked. So let's right-click on the sample database and go down here and say New Query. All right, now for the query, we're going to go back to the lab guide. Let me get my browser up here. And if you, in the AWS console, we're going to scroll down. We're at the very end of the lab now. We did all these steps. And we want to copy this little SQL query right here. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, come back over to SQL Server, paste that in, and let's hope this works. Here we go. Run the query, and all the data is there. So that's it. That's the end of the lab. And that's actually going to conclude our webinar for today. As I said, what we're going to do is send you a link to the lab in Quick Labs. So what you need to do is stand by and look for that in your email within the next 24 hours. It's not going to come right away necessarily, but in the meantime, you can go ahead and create your own Quick Labs account, and then you can browse around and look at the Windows Learning Quest that we have. We have 4 learning quests. One of them is about database topics. And this lab that you're going to do for free is not one of the database ones. That means when you complete this lab within 24 hours, you'll be able to get a credit in your Quick Labs account so you can go back and do one of the other SQL Server labs, and that'll get you on your way towards completing that learning quest. Okay, so we're wrapping up the webinar now. If you have any other Q&A questions for us, pop it in real quick in the Q&A panel. Otherwise, we really want to thank you for attending today. And also, if you do get a chance to fill out the survey question in the webinar, we appreciate that. Thank you very much for attending our pilot launch of the SQL Server webinar on AWS. And also, please do email us at aws-webcasts@amazon.com if you have any questions about this webinar or suggestions for other webinars that you would like to see us do in the future. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good day.